What's up, you guys? Welcome back to another tutorial. I posted on my Instagram story earlier if you guys wanted me to make a tutorial on how I made this edit. It's mainly consists of like a rolling shot. Instead of having 3 people to take this one shot, I'm gonna show you how you can make this in Photoshop. A lot easier way to do it is in Photoshop, but if you're taking professional photos, I would rather recommend you guys doing it in person. But anyways, yeah, so I will show you guys the original. This was the original shot that I did. This was back in San Francisco around sunset time, and as you can see, my settings on the top right hand side, I did use a Nikon D810 camera with the Sigma 50mm of f1.4, and as you can see, and always remember, always shoot in RAW, never shoot in JPEG, because in RAW the camera will keep all the details, so when you edit you'll have more room to play around with shadows and all of that. So as you can see, I shot this photo at ISO 100 at 50mm at f1.4 at about 1/500 a second. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys how I made this normal looking photo that do look nice, but you want to take it a step further, you can go ahead and edit it more. So we're gonna go from something from this to this, and I'm gonna show you guys every step how I made this edit. So yeah, so I'm gonna go back, and I'm gonna go ahead and hit reset, and I did took photos of the settings that I used, so I'm gonna go ahead and use about the same settings and go through the whole steps and stuff. So I'm gonna do reset, and as you can see, this is the original shot. I did cropped in the photo to make it more focused on the car. So the first thing that I always do, and I use 80% of the time I do use Adobe Lightroom to edit my photos. I do use Photoshop some of the time, but not all the time. Lightroom is my main program that I use. But yeah, so this is the main shot that I took, original shot at it as is out of the camera. I'm gonna go ahead and go down to where it says lens correction on the right hand side. I'm gonna go ahead and do the remove chromatic aberration and also enable profile correction. What the profile correction does is basically, if you shoot photos in RAW format, your camera will also keep the settings, or it will remember what lens and at what f point, at what shutter speed that you took this shot. So that's why I do get these ISO 100 at 50mm f1.4. so on the top right hand side, that's how I get those settings. If I shoot in JPEG, I wouldn't get those options. So always remember to shoot in RAW format, never use JPEG, just because in RAW format you have a lot more option to play around with your edits. So I'm gonna go ahead and click both of them. It automatically recognized that I did use the Sigma 50mm f1.4. so then I'm gonna go ahead and go up, and what I did was I went ahead and cropped the photo a little bit in. I'm gonna go ahead and try to see if I can. I believe I used something like right here, and then what I did was I also leveled the image. So I clicked on the front wheel center cap and also dragged the second point to the back wheel center cap. What this does is basically makes your image align perfectly horizontally to those 2 points. So now you can see is perfect. So if I hit backslash on your keyboard, you can see the before and the after. So what I did was you want to go into your basic tab on the right hand side. I did bump up the temperature from 55 to 6200. Since I took this photo during sunset, I wanted to make it feel a little bit warmer, just so I can get the feel of the sunset. And next up, what I did was I went ahead and upped the contrast to 14, and also up the shadows by 23. Just bring out a little bit more details in the wheels and also in the background. Next up, I didn't do anything with the whites or the blacks. For the texture, this is a new option that you get in the Adobe Lightroom if you update it. And I think in this one I just went up 10, and also in the clarity I also went up 10. I don't usually go higher in clarity just because this kind of looks not bad, but like too edited. And then in the dehaze I did went 10 up, so I can, so if you have a lot of fog in the background or in the image, you can try to play around with the dehaze. So if I do more dehaze, it's gonna go ahead and kind of like make it a little bit more contrasty. What I only went up to 10 because I'm gonna go ahead and try to, my idea was basically add a fog kind of blurriness in the background, and which you'll guys see next up. So with the vibrance I went -30, and with the saturation I went 33 up, and with the tone curves I usually do 3 points on each core at intersections. And I believe I'm gonna go ahead and I did took some photos, and I believe I only used the middle points. I'm gonna go ahead and pull it down a little bit, bring down the midtones. And for the HSL colors, with this you can play around how you want the image to look like. For me, I went up 31 on the reds, went 18 on the orange, I went -4 on the yellows, go ahead do 32 on the greens, and 34 on the aquas, and also 34 on the blues. And I went over to luminance, and also I'm gonna go ahead and see what I want. And in the luminance, actually that's backwards. So so with the saturation, I'm gonna go ahead and do it again. With the saturation, what I did was I went up 67% on the saturation. I went 64 on the oranges, went 11 on the yellows, 13 on the greens, 22 plus on the aquas, and -16 on the blues. Then went to luminance, and here I went 31 in the reds, I went 18 up in the oranges, -4 in the yellows, 132 in the greens, 34 in aquas, and 34 in blues. So as you can see, if I hit backslash on my keyboard, as you can see, it looks a little bit more vibrant, looks a little bit more warm colors, which I was going for as my final image. Next up, what I'm gonna do is go ahead and scroll down. For the split toning, I play around. It depends on how your image looking like. I usually for this specific image, I went 3 in the saturation for the highlights, and I went a little bit between the blue and the aquas, and then same thing with the shadows. I went 3, and then I went for this one, I went with the little bit yellow color. And then for the sharpening, I go all the way up, and I also hold down my option key or alt key on the keyboard and do the mask. So anything you see on the screen white is only sharpening those parts. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave right there. And for the noise reduction, I'm gonna go ahead and do around 25. And then let me see what else I did to it. I'm looking at my phone, the photos that I took. And then the last thing I did was if you come down to the calibration, this is where if you're going for the aquas and orange color kind of tone, this is where you can play around. So with the hue, I went -30, and with the green primaries, I went 20 up, and I went 17 up in the reds. So as you can see, if I do backslash on the keyboard, it does make a lot of big difference. And another thing I did was as you can see, the sky is, whoa, hold on, what happened, but oh, I want the haze. Okay. Another thing I did was, as you can see, the sky is a little bit too blown out. So as you can see in the final image, it's a little bit more. So I brought back the exposure in the before I edited. So what I usually do is I go ahead and select the gradient tool. I bring down the gradient, and from here I play around with my exposure. So I went down with the highlights, up the exposure a little bit, up the saturation a little bit, kind of get that bluish color in the sky. And I'm just trying to see if I did the same thing with the ground. And okay, so yeah, so this is my final image. I'm also gonna go ahead and use the brush, also up the exposure a little bit, and I'm gonna go ahead and bring back the exposure in the wheels, both wheels on the back and the front. And go ahead and bring it a little bit more up the contrast a little bit, and bring it down just a tad bit. And then, so what you want to do is basically you want to go ahead and hit right click, edit in Adobe Photoshop CC. What this gonna do is basically open up this image in Photoshop. Let's see if it opens. And here we have the photo that we originally did it in Photoshop. Just looking at it. Okay, perfect. And you will see your layers on the right hand side. This is where you're gonna add layers to add smoke in the background, add the blur, motion blur, and all of that. So what you want to do is basically you're gonna go ahead and hit Command while holding Command on Mac and hit J. You're gonna basically duplicate the background layer. So if you mess up something on layer 1, you can always delete that, make another copy of the background layer. So yeah, so that's my always step 1 is to make a copy of original, because if I start working on the original image, if I mess up something, it's gonna mess up the whole thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a copy. What my next layer is gonna be, I'm gonna go ahead, just 1 second. Okay, so yeah, so you're gonna go ahead and make duplicate of the bottom background layer. To make the motion blur, you want to have the layer 1 selected. You want to go to the top, go to filters, go to blur gallery, and go ahead do path blur. This is where you can select which way you want the blur to be. So I went ahead, push the arrow. I'm gonna go ahead and line it up with the roads so it's perfectly aligned. And actually, since the car is moving in the front, I'm gonna move the arrow back. So wherever the arrow is pointing, the motion blur is gonna move that way. So since I have the arrow in the back, it's gonna move. It's gonna look like if there's more motion blur in the back. And if you go ahead and look at your right hand side, you'll see you can change the speed of the blur. I believe I went 65 on the speed, if I remember correctly. I went up on the taper, and then I also, I think at this, when you are at this step, you just want to play around with like how does it look or whatnot. So I'm gonna go ahead and stick with 170 for the endpoint speed, and you're gonna go ahead and hit OK. So what it's gonna do is it's gonna apply those blur effects to that, just the layer 1. Next up, what you want to do is you want to go to background layer, Command J, make another layer, bring that up on the top of the layer 1, and you want to just rename this car. I'm gonna go ahead and rename this car. And what you want to do in this one is you want to select just the car, and you want to have the car basically cut out. So you're gonna have the background blur but not the car itself, because in this you can see the car is blurry. So what you want to do is go ahead and select the car. The easier way I found out, if you have updated Adobe Photoshop, if you hit a W on your keyboard, it'll bring up the if you go on the magic wand tool, just basically selects. But if you hit W while the wand is tool selected, I'm gonna go ahead and hit select subject on the top. What this basically does is basically Photoshop try to recognize what pixels are different from the background, and it try to do its best job to select. As you can see, it did a pretty good job of selecting it. So yeah, so if you have an updated version of Photoshop, you don't have to go through with the pen tool and go really around the corners. It's basically selecting the pixel colors from the background, and just basically is best to do that. And I think it looks pretty good. 90% is good. I'm gonna go ahead and go to the magnetic lasso tool, or you can hit L on your keyboard. It's gonna bring up the lasso tool, and I usually do the magnetic lasso. And if you zoom in at any part, as you can see, it's selected a little bit of the grass. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hold down Option. You'll see a minus sign next to the tool. That means anything you'll be selecting is gonna not select that object. So for example, if I do, while holding the option, click on it, let go of the option key, and if I'm gonna go ahead and select around the edge of the car, and it's gonna do its best job to select it. And if I go back to that one point, click on it, what it did basically, it deselected that part of the grass. So what you want to do is after you do the auto select subject tool, you want to go in, check every edge of the car or any subject that you want to do, and make sure that is only the car is selected. So I'm gonna go ahead and quickly do the stuff to the whole car, and when something is not selected, instead of holding option, you want to hit shift. While holding shift, you'll see plus sign. So that means you will be adding this selection to the original selection. So I'm gonna go ahead and click loop back to 1 point. As you can see, this was not selected, but now it's selected. So to add in the selection, hold down shift. To deselect something, hold down option. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that around the whole car, and I'll catch you guys when I have everything. So now I do have just the car selected. You'll see the marching ants around the car. What you want to do is basically, while you have the layer selected, you want to hold down command, hit J again. It's just gonna make a cutout of the car, whatever you have selected. So if I deselect the other layers, you'll see only the car layer now, and that's what we want. We only want the car layer. And you can go ahead and delete this layer because we don't need it. So now, as you can see, if I turn off the car layer, you'll see that the whole thing is blurry. But when I turn on the car layer, the car is in good clear or focus, and the background and the ground is blurry or in motion. So another thing that I usually do is, while I selected the blurry layer, I'm gonna go ahead and hit S on my keyboard. It's gonna bring up the tool. It's the clone tool, and I'm gonna go ahead and clone a little bit of the front, because when the car is moving, you will have a blur motion in the background, in the back of the car, but not in the front. So I'm gonna go ahead and just do the top part, and also do the roof a little bit. So, and you don't have to do the really good job on it because the other car layer will be on the top. So now I go ahead and turn on the car layer. You can see you have a little bit of the blur in the background, but not in the front. So, and again, it all depends on what kind of photo you took or whatnot. So now I have the layer selected and everything. I'm gonna make a copy of just the car layer. What you can do is basically have it selected, drag down to this new layer. It's gonna make a copy of that layer, and this is where we add the wheels, the spin on the wheels, basically. So while having the copy of the car cutout layer selected, go ahead and go up to the filters again. Go ahead and go to blur gallery and go to spin blur. This is where you can, you're gonna add the spin on the wheels. So you'll see this option, and what I usually do is I have the middle of the circle right on the center caps. I'm gonna go ahead and bring down the side, try to match it up a little bit better on the wheels. And if you look on your right hand side of the tools, you'll see it says blur angle 15%. I'm gonna go ahead and go to 25, and when you go to 25, you can go ahead and see how does the blur look. So I think 25 for me. I'm gonna do 25. So now the front tire is selected. Now if you click on any spot on the image, it's gonna make another spin blur, and that's you're gonna put it on the back wheel. Go ahead and do the same thing what you did in the front. Let's see. And yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing, 25, and go ahead and hit OK. And I'm gonna let it process, and there we go. It's added the blur to the wheels, and there we go. And another thing I did was I cloned bunch of the floor. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit S on my keypad, bring out the clone stamp tool. I'm gonna go ahead and clone the ground a little bit. So try to match it up the best you can, and go ahead and, so wherever you see the plus sign is cloning that part of the image. So as you can see, it kind of looks a little bit better, but just try to do your best job so it doesn't look too bad. It does take a little bit of practice, but once you get once you try it a couple of different times, you'll know how to do it. That's how I learned. So yeah, Adobe Lightroom is way easier to learn than Photoshop. And I'm gonna hit J on my keypad, select the area, drag down, and Photoshop is gonna do its best to match the color accuracy or to the rest of the image. You can see it's a bunch of clones, and do that. I'm gonna do it one more time on the edges, and do that on this edge. Yeah, it looks better. I'm gonna go ahead and try to fix this because you can see the edge of the selection. So yeah, perfect. So one last thing that I did was on top of the layer 1, I made a new layer. It has nothing on it. And how I added the background, the fog in the background, was I selected the brush tool, or you can hit a B on your keypad, and you can find different kind of smoke brushes online. I found this one smoke brush. And then you can just basically change the angles and stuff into the brush settings. I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger, and while I have the color selected, whatever the color you have selected on the top, it's gonna do that. So as you can see, it's added the white smoke, and I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit of the yellow smoke too, just to change it up a little bit. Go back to white and go on top, and there we go. And to make it blurry, what you want to do is basically have the layer selected where you have the smoke, go to filters, go to blur, go to Gaussian blur, and this is where you can play around with how you want the blur of the smoke to look like. I'm gonna go ahead and around there, and also I'm gonna go ahead and hit E on the keypad. It's gonna bring out the eraser, and I'm gonna go ahead and erase the smoke from the floor because it doesn't look natural at all. So try to like blend it in the best you can with your photo. The more natural you make it, the better it's gonna look like. So yeah, so I went ahead and did that, and I'm gonna go ahead and hit, and then after you have done everything, I'm gonna go ahead and hit Command S. What this basically gonna do is basically save this whole image and bring it back into the Lightroom. So as you can see, it's loading. It's gonna bring back the layer that we just worked on in Photoshop, and there you go. And from here you can just play around more. What I basically did was I added another gradient to the floor, down the exposure a little bit, added a contrast, and I'm gonna go ahead and quit the Photoshop, and yeah, added a little bit more clarity to the floor. And last thing I did was added like the sun flare, you can call it. I brought another gradient from the angle and bring out the yellow temp up a little bit more. And yeah, then I'm gonna go ahead and select the brush really quick. Since my car is white, I'm gonna go ahead and paint the car a little bit to make it a little bit more pop out from the background. Just paint the white colors. Is basically desaturating the color, but at the same time also upping the exposure on the white color itself. This is just to make it a little bit more pop out from the background. As you can see, I'm not doing a really good job of it because this is just a tutorial. And go ahead and hit done. And after you've done all of it, this is what the final image will look like. So yeah, so I hope you guys got to see how I usually edit my photos. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and show you the before. So this was the before edit, and this is the after edit, Photoshop and everything. So yeah, you guys, thank you. If you guys haven't been following me on Instagram, it's at krox_GT350. That's where I post most of my photography work. So if you're not following me, go ahead and follow me. Also subscribe to my YouTube channel, comment, like, and appreciate every one of you guys who've been following me for this long. I recently hit 10,000 followers on my Instagram page, so thank you to everybody who has been following me since day one. I remember how far I've came since my first photo I posted on Instagram. So I'm still learning. It's not I'm a professional or whatever, but every day I try to do different stuff when I edit. So remember, the more you play around with the tools you have, the better you'll get. And still, I'm not perfect. I'm still learning. I learn new things every day. So yeah, so go ahead and give me a follow on Instagram at krox_GT350. And also go ahead and subscribe to this YouTube channel if you guys want to see more tutorials, more videos on future videos. For example, what camera I used. I will be making a new video on what camera lenses that I use to take photos, and what software that I use and all of that. Also will be making another video on my car, what mods do I have and all of that. So because I know a lot of people want probably just thinking what mods do I have on the car and probably what camera do I use. So yeah, so make sure you guys subscribe and follow me on Instagram. Keep an eye out for the next video, and yeah, and hopefully you guys like this tutorial. I'm still trying to I'm not used to this making YouTube videos, and this is the first time I'm making YouTube videos, and it's a little bit awkward just talking to the camera. But yeah, the more I'll do it, the more comfortable I feel. So yeah, so catch you guys on the next one. Hope you guys like what I do. If you guys live in Milwaukee area or Chicago and want to get your car professionally shoot and edited, hit me up. DM me on my Instagram, like I said. So yeah, so catch you guys on the next one.